Okay, hello, good afternoon. So today is the last, this week is the final week of lectures. On Wednesday, we'll give out study questions for the final exam. So on Wednesday, we'll give out 12 study questions. When you go into the final exam, which will be 3 hours, you will see 6 of those 12 questions word for word, and you will have to answer 3 of them. So there should be no unpleasant surprises on the final exam. I mean, it may be unpleasant, but it won't be a surprise on the final exam. Any questions about that? They're meant to be answers that balance beauty and clarity of organization with communication of a great deal of information indicating what you've been doing all term. So it's a matter of balance. But if it was me, actually, the GSI should talk to this, but I'll just tell you, if it was me, I would always err on the side of length. You're trying to show what you've been doing all term. You want to do yourself justice. I will say, I'm always amazed at a 3-hour exam, how many people pack up at the 2-hour mark. I just don't know what that's about. But anyway, any comments, Samara, Antonio? About? About erring on the side of writing more. Yeah.
As long as it's relevant. Yeah. Like you don't just want to write that
yes.
nationalist.
Yeah, you're risk being penalized if you write stuff that is not relevant or not on point. Yeah. Yep.
Is it the same general structure as the essays from the semester, though, or is it like a different type of thing?
It's the same type. In the essays, you're held reasonably rigorously to this thing of stating your main thesis at the start. I think it's hard to write like that. And I don't know if you have comments. I don't think we would hold you so tightly to doing that in the essay, in the exam questions.
So it's not like intro.
Ideally, it's like that. Get as close to that as you can, but it's hard to do that in exam conditions. And I think, is that right? We would appreciate. Yeah, it's the same type of thing graded a little more leniently. Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
What's kind of like the average essay that you see for practice?
I can't remember, and honestly, it's hard to give an answer to that. People write so differently. Some people write giant stuff on every second line. Some people write tiny little. So I'm not really sure I could answer that in terms of pages. Do the GSIs have comments? Four substantial paragraphs. Yeah. 4 to 6 substantial paragraphs. Okay. So today we're looking at Dennett's wonderful article, True Believers, the Intentional Strategy, and Why It Works. On Wednesday, we'll look at the notion of intelligence as it figures in IQ tests, why it matters, what that's about. The general interest of notions like intelligence for us has to do with, are they causal factors? Is intelligence some quantity you've got that makes you do stuff? Or how should you think about it? Intelligence is really important in everyday life, in the real world. Probably most of you guys have done some kind of IQ test or some related kind of test at some point, and if not already, then you surely shortly will be. But what is going on? What are these things measuring? And how do they relate to our imaginative understanding of one another? Should we think of them as belonging to the scientific understanding of human beings, or do they have something to do with our imaginative understanding of one another? Then on Friday we'll look at schizophrenia, which is often taken to be, Jasper's took it to be outside the scope of our possibility of imaginative understanding. And we'll look a bit at what science can tell us about schizophrenia and what that implies for imaginative understanding. Today is Dennett's picture of what's going on in common sense psychology, what's going on when we have imaginative understanding of one another. And Dennett's picture here is really kind of strange. It is strange and beautiful. And I want to begin with an example that I think brings out the strangeness of what he is saying. For that reason, it may not be the most immediately comprehensible example, but bear with me. Follow me very, very closely here. Okay, suppose you have a billiard table with a whole bunch of billiard balls on it. The table, as you can see, is, for all practical purposes, frictionless, and the cushions are perfectly elastic, if that's the word I want. Balls just bounce right off them in accordance with Newton's laws of motion, and they will keep going for just months once you have an initial shot. So when you have an initial shot, all the balls start moving in accordance with the deterministic laws of physics. And the system is likely to be chaotic in the sense that very small, in practice unmeasurable differences in what you do with the initial cue shot will have big differences for what happens later with the balls. So it might be deterministic but chaotic. Does that make sense? Yeah. You can't predict from any practical measurement of the initial cue shot. Well, there may be small differences that would make a big difference in what's happening later. But the important thing is it's deterministic. Yeah. So suppose you have an initial configuration of the balls, and then you set all the balls rolling, and they roll for months. And then one Monday at 2 o'clock, you are in the room where this table is with all these balls rolling about, and it just so happens that all the balls have wound up in the top left-hand corner. And you say, wow, look at that. They're all in the top left-hand corner. Why is that? You ask your wise old teacher, isn't that amazing? How come they're all up there in the top left-hand corner? Now, I think given the way I've described it, there are two reactions you could have. One is, that's just an accident. It's just a coincidence that they're all in the top left-hand corner. Another thing you could say is, well, look, the whole system is rigidly deterministic. There aren't any accidents. What would it mean anyway, an accident? Nothing random happened. But anyway, whichever you say, it's not like there is a magnet underneath the table. It's not like all the balls have iron cores and there's a magnet under the table pulling them all to the top left. It just so happened that way. So there's no physical variable like an electromagnet under the table that's having large systematic specific effects pulling the balls up to the top left-hand corner. So in that sense, when you say it's just an accident, what you mean there is something like there's no physical cause for the balls congregating at one place rather than another. If there was a magnet under the table, then you could pull it round, and now you make them congregate in the bottom left, now you make them congregate in the top right, now you make them congregate in the middle. But that's not what's going on. There's nothing like that going on. That's why you say it's just an accident, even though it's rigidly deterministic. Well, suppose you got it set up so that you've got an initial configuration of the balls, and you get an initial cue shot where maybe for weeks, maybe for, 15 or 16 weeks, every time you go past there on a Monday at 2 o'clock, all the balls are congregating in the top left-hand corner. And you say, wow, isn't that weird? How come every Monday when I come here, there they all are, up in the top left-hand corner? Well, again, there's no electromagnet. We just set the system up so that that's what happened when you got the initial cue shot. There's still nothing like the magnet here, where there's no physical variable with large systematic specific effects. So again, you could say, how come every Monday they're right up here? And your wise old teacher says, what is it wise old teacher says? Listen, grasshopper, it's just a coincidence. And that's consistent with saying that the whole system is rigidly deterministic. It just so happens that they're all winding up there on the left. Okay. Well, now suppose that this system we're considering is not billiard balls. Suppose it's us. Suppose it's human beings. Suppose it's the people in this room right now. Now, suppose we view each other as physical systems, right? So, actually, here are Martian psychologists. Martian psychologists, I mean, we've talked about them before, but I thought you might want a picture. They're incredibly clever. They scan us as physical systems very easily. So our physics, our movements, don't present any more of a prediction problem to them than the behavior of billiard balls does to us. So they look at us as physical systems, and maybe, they're so smart. Their brains stand to ours somewhat as ours stand to ants' brains. They just glance at us, and they use our movements as exercises for their physics classes. They say, predict what this system is going to be doing. Predict what's going to be happening. It's never occurred to them that humans are conscious. I mean, they just think, look, soft, squashy things like that couldn't possibly be conscious. But they can view us as physical systems. They see us right now, and a Martian physics student says, look at that, wow, they're all got into the same room. Why did that happen? And the wise old teacher says, well, grasshopper, that's just a coincidence. You could predict that was going to happen. Maybe it's deterministic. But there's no deep explanation here. It's not like there is some magnet. It's not like everyone in the class has an iron core and there is some magnet drawing us all here. It's just an accident. There's no physical control variable making us all come right back here. Now, as I said, the Martians, treating us just like billiard balls, can maybe predict everything that's going to happen just as well as we can predict what's going to happen with billiard balls. There is, though, something that we get that the Martians miss. We've got something like where and when we all said we'd meet. And that really does have a big impact. If we had said, well, we'll meet on Mondays at 3, we'd all be here at a different time. If we said we'll meet on Tuesdays at 4, we'd all be here at a different time. That's like the electromagnet. If that had gone differently, then the outcomes for where we all congregate would have been different. Since the Martians don't think of us intentionally, as Dennett says, they don't take the intentional strategy, there are patterns in our behavior that are just mysterious to them. The Martians are missing something perfectly objective, the patterns in human behavior that are describable from the intentional stance. And in our terms, what he means there is using imaginative understanding. That we predict, I mean, the only reason we all show up right now is that everybody thinks that everybody else is going to be there. We think that's when we're all congregating. So we can predict these things, but the Martians maybe can't. And suppose you think what the calculations are that a Martian student is going to have to do to predict where we'll all be at 2 p.m. next Monday. Actually, that's not a good example. Where we'll all be at 2 p.m. on Friday, right? That the Martians got to take every individual in the class, predict their physical movements between now and then. So everyone's moving all over the place. Some of you guys will be getting on planes. Everybody's traveling a bit. And they've got to predict where you go to all these places. And they can predict that. You could do that in principle physically. if you're smart enough, you got enough data. And they predict, wow, look at that. My prediction says next Friday they'll all be right back here. Isn't that weird? Isn't that wild? It just keeps happening. Look at that. There is this pattern in the data. Because we think in terms of human psychology, because we think in terms of each other's minds, we have these predictive powers where you can say, yeah, most of us will be right back here on Wednesday. Most of us will be right back here on Friday. And the Martians would say, wow, that is amazing. How come creatures with such primitive brains are being able to do these calculations whose complexity beats many of our best physics students? Because our physics students are having to do these complex calculations. We're just doing it like that. We just look at when it's written. We say, okay, we can do it. So our predictive powers, using imaginative understanding, are going to seem magical to a Martian. If we didn't think in terms of minds, there would be patterns in the world that we would just miss. Dennett gives this story as an analogy for what we're doing with imaginative understanding. There was a merchant in Baghdad who sent his servant to market to buy provisions. And in a little while, the servant came back, white and trembling, and said, "Master, just now when I was in the marketplace, I was jostled by a woman in the crowd. When I turned, I saw it was death that jostled me. I will go to Samara, and death will not find me." That sounds like a good idea. But then the merchant went down to the marketplace, and this is spoken by Death, and he saw me, Death, standing in the crowd. And the merchant came to me and said, "Why did you make a threatening gesture to my servant when you saw him this morning?" And Death said, "That was not a threatening gesture. It was only a start of surprise. I was astonished to see him in Baghdad, for I had an appointment with him tonight in Samara." That's from Somerset Maugham. It's kind of obvious what the point of that is, right? The point is, Death doesn't know the causes of things. Death doesn't know what makes what happen. Death doesn't know what made the merchant servant go to Samara. Death doesn't know that it was her own gesture that made that happen. So Death doesn't know the causes of things. But Death, nonetheless, has an appointment book that can be used to predict everyone's movements. Now that seems kind of magical. You got this appointment book, it's got nothing to do with the physical causes of things. But it's nonetheless giving Death ways of predicting where people are going to be. And then its point is, if you think of people only as physical systems, then our predictive powers seem like Death's. The fact that we can get it, that we're all going to be right here, or most of us are going to be right here on Wednesday or Friday or whenever, that is us seeing a pattern in things that seems completely invisible to someone who's only a physicist, to someone who only views people as biological systems. So imaginative understanding lets us get onto patterns in human behavior that would be completely invisible if you had only a physical understanding of human beings. Are you comfortable with that? Yes?
What if they can understand imagination, they can understand the
Sorry, can you say that again? Who can predict our imagination? Oh, the Martians can predict our imaginative understanding.
So they
Very good, yeah.
can interpret our brain and understand now this guy is going to do the imagination understand. And what he's doing is like go through the whole thing.
Isn't that interesting?
Now I
Yeah.
can make, he's going to imagination understand the whole thing and turn into this calculus.
Yeah, if they could do that, yeah, and indeed that is just the kind of thing that physicists do, right? You take the imaginative understanding and you use that to predict what we're going to do. Yeah, and they say, boy, this is great. That still wouldn't tell them how we are able to do this. Yeah, unless they got onto it that we had minds. Yeah, the point here is, it's a natural idea that the reason we need to think about people in terms of their minds is that we don't have that good an understanding of people as physical systems. Yeah? If you don't have that good an understanding of something as a physical system, it's very natural to think of it as having a mind. So if you don't understand the weather, how the weather works very well, then you say things like, well, the gods are angry, or the gods are smiling on us, and you think in terms of the weather, in terms of the dynamics of the gods' mental lives. Or if you're trying to get your computer to work, you say, this stupid thing, you treat it as if it's trying to help you or trying to thwart you. You treat it as if it's got a mind, because you can't do the physics directly. So it's a natural idea, if you could do the physics directly, all this stuff about the mind would drop out. Yeah. Dennett's point is that's not true. Yeah. And your answer there actually goes along with that, because it's saying if the Martians could use the physics to get onto us having a mind, then they could go via that to do predictions. Yeah. But that actually just gives Dennett everything he wants. Yeah. Because it's only going by way of the mind. Yeah. Yep.
So, you clarify the claim that you couldn't see the patterns from a physical sense?
Yeah.
So it seems like here's something that you could do from a physical sense. You could see that there's this kind of bit of data in Berkeley's computers for every single human in this room and if they're enrolled in this class or whatever. Which you wouldn't understand as a class or
Right.
enrolled in a physical sense, right? So you'd be able to find this like isomorphism between the data set for every given student.
That's very good,
class,
yeah.
And then say, okay, well this indicates that at a particular time they will be able to do this kind of thing. So on the one hand, that seems to indicate to me that then maybe you could see the patterns from a physical standpoint, but then maybe the claim that Dennett's making is that, no, once you've seen the pattern, that's what it is, it's taking a physical sense. So I'm confused about whether he's saying the thing that seems wrong, or
Yeah.
the thing where, no, once you see the patterns, that's just what it is.
No, it's a really interesting example, right? It's clear what Antonio is saying, that if you've got that physical bit of data in the Berkeley computers, in the admin computers, then you could use that to predict where everyone's going to be. Right, and you might say, well, is that what causes it? Is that what's making it happen? Well, let's try fiddling with it. Yeah? And of course it doesn't, right? It doesn't work. But you're right, there could be that kind of physical correlation, but it wouldn't necessarily give you a cause of what was going on. Yeah. I'm sorry, someone over there. Yep. Yeah.
If you have a physical computer that isn't really in conflict and error places where I would decide not to go to class that day.
Yes, that's interesting. Yeah. Though it's also true that there can be that kind of error in our ordinary understanding of one another. You can say, well, I thought you were going to be there. I was relying on you being there. People let you down let me down the whole time anyway. Yeah. So there is that error in the imaginative understanding anyhow. Okay, so you see the idea of the patterns there that are visible, if you think in terms of people having minds, that are just invisible. You can't understand their significance if you don't think of people having minds. How do we feel about that? Put your hand up if you're comfortable with that. If you're not comfortable with that. If you don't know what I just asked, if you don't know what I'm talking about. Okay. Here's another way to get at the same thing. I think a lot of scientifically minded psychologists, and certainly a lot of scientifically minded philosophers, have thought, why should we talk in terms of minds at all? It's not really that good an idea to talk in terms of minds. Most of the phenomena that human beings exhibit, we don't really know how to understand. Take things like, why do people sleep? Why do people dream? Nobody really knows. What's going on with people who have psychiatric disorders? What's going on with schizophrenics? How can we explain them in psychological terms? Well, we can't. There's tons of stuff that ordinary human psychology just doesn't explain at all. On the other hand, if you look at theories of cell functioning, if you look at biological theories of how the cells in the brain are all wired up together, how cells excite or inhibit one another, what kinds of communication there is between them, then these are very general theories. These apply right across all animals, and they're just being applied to us. It's just a matter of complexity, that we're pretty complex, that human brains are pretty complex. But untangling that complexity is, from this standpoint, just a matter of detail. And once you understand it in those terms, then really we will want to drop talking about the mind and talk directly in terms of human beings' biological functioning. And a student I had last year from Shanghai said that when he went home, he finds that all his friends talk about things like endorphins. It really stimulates my endorphins. And their feeling is that this is being very scientific. And he's really not sure what to make of this. Paul and Pat Churchland are a married couple of philosophers who, for decades, have said we should abandon talk about the mind. It's getting us nowhere talking about the mind. We should be trying to talk directly in terms of brain function. This is from the journalist who was interviewing them for the New Yorker. Paul and Pat, realizing that the revolutionary neuroscience they dream of is still in its infancy, are nonetheless already preparing themselves for this future, making the appropriate adjustments in their everyday conversation. One afternoon recently, Paul says, he was at home making dinner when Pat burst in the door, having come straight from a frustrating faculty meeting. She said, "Paul, don't speak to me. My serotonin levels have hit bottom. My brain is awash in glucocorticoids. My blood vessels are full of adrenaline, and if it weren't for my endogenous opiates, I'd have driven the car into a tree on my way home. My dopamine levels need lifting. Pour me a Chardonnay and I'll be down in a minute." Of course, the Churchlands have been a very influential couple. They have a large group of graduate students and postdocs. They've noticed it's not just they who talk this way. Their students now speak of psychopharmacology as comfortably as of food. So you see the idea. You just don't talk about what you want. Don't talk about beliefs. Don't talk about hopes. Don't talk about wishes. Don't talk about the longings of the human heart. Just talk about glucocorticoids. Cut directly to the chase. Yeah? Why not? What would you be missing? The argument is you'd be missing nothing. If you had enough knowledge, detailed knowledge of other people's biology, and enough detailed knowledge of the physics governing them, you could do the whole thing of predicting their behavior at that level. But if Dennett's strange kind of point is right, that's not true. And Dennett kind of rounds it up into a definition of what it is to have a mind. And the way he puts it is in terms of what it is to have beliefs. He says, take that strategy of using imaginative understanding or thinking in terms of the mind that lets you predict what other people are doing. So, talk about someone's mind to predict what they're going to do. You say to me, I'm going to get a coffee right after class. So at the end of class, I predict you're going to be making a beeline for some cafe. Right? That's the kind of thing we all do the whole time. Then I can predict your behavior using the intentional strategy. Dennett's picture is, that's all it is to have beliefs. If someone can lock onto you and use the assumption that you have a mind to predict what you're going to do, then you have a mind. There's no more to it than that. Any object, or as I shall say, any system whose behavior is well predicted by this strategy, that strategy meaning taking the person to have beliefs and hopes and desires and longings, that is, in the fullest sense of the word, a believer. You have beliefs, if that can be what happens. So what it is to be a true believer, to truly be, this does not mean something religious. What it is to truly be a believer is to be an intentional system. That is, a system whose behavior is reliably and voluminously predictable via the intentional strategy. That is, via the assumption that you have beliefs and hopes and intentions and longings. So one analogy you might use here is, back in the Middle Ages, there was Ptolemaic astronomy, where the idea was that all the planets, or all the heavenly bodies, went in perfect circles around a static Earth. And people had been developing this system since the Babylonians and making predictions as to what they were going to see in the night sky the next night. And when you do that in a simple way, it goes wrong if you're assuming that everything's just going in simple circles. But then they assumed that things are describing two circular motions simultaneously, going round and round like that at the same time as you're going round and round like that. Stop me if this gets too technical. You can then assume, once you've got that far, you can assume that things are describing three circular motions simultaneously, and so on. And if you get the maths sophisticated enough, you can do it. And by the Middle Ages, they had done it. You could predict exactly what was going to happen in the night sky by assuming that everything was going in perfect circles, just complexes of perfect circles. So the system of talking about epicycles there, Ptolemaic astronomy, they weren't daft. Nobody thought that this had anything to do with the dynamics of the system, that this was what was making the planets do stuff. But it was what they called a convenient fiction. It's a predictive gadget. It's a kind of abacus that you can use to predict what the planets are going to do. So in this way of thinking of it, thinking about the mind is just having a handy abacus for figuring out what this complex physical system is going to do. You and I, all of us, are far too complex physically for it to be easy to do the math directly at the level of the physics. So you get a convenient scratch pad. You get this abacus that you can use. And I use this thing, assume they've got beliefs and desires and so on, and then I can predict for you what they're going to do. And that's all it takes to have a mind. If you're predictable in that way, then you have a mind. If this scratch pad works for predicting your behavior, then you have hopes and longings and fears and loves and so on. So the idea of saying, oh, there's no such thing as the mind, that just goes away. Because all it is to have a mind is to be predictable in that way. And most of us are predictable in that way. So you don't need to eliminate talk about the mind in favor of talk about biology, because all there is to having a mind is being predictable using that kind of convenient fiction. So that's Dennett's defense of talk about the mind. So in this way of thinking of it, talking about the mind isn't a way of talking about the causes of behavior. It's just a way of predicting behavior, just as Ptolemaic astronomy isn't a way of talking about the causes of the movements of the planets. It's just a way of predicting them. So talking about your beliefs and desires, and the causes of what you're doing, that's at the level of neurophysiology. But predictive ability, you get that from this abacus, talking about beliefs and desires. Are you comfortable with that? Right. That we do think about them as the causes. If that's true, then Dennett is wrong. Yeah? Because the whole point of this, let me just go back a bit. I do recommend reading this. If you manage to follow this lecture, then you're in very good shape for following the article. You should be able to read it just like you read a newspaper. And there's lots of stuff in it, ways of putting things that I'm not doing here. But here is what he says. What it is to be a true believer is to be an intentional system, a system whose behavior is reliably and voluminously predictable by the intentional strategy. That doesn't require you to be knowing the causes of anything. Or the beliefs could be causes. It doesn't rule that out, no. But it doesn't require it. Having a mind isn't a matter of having beliefs and desires that cause anything. That's the point of the picture, really. That when you have this idea of, well, I'm just going to talk about serotonin levels or glucocorticoids or whatever it is, then I'm really just talking about the causes. The causes, there aren't any psychological causes. Yeah. You shouldn't be comfortable with that. Is it clear what he's saying? Or what I'm saying he's saying, anyway? Pause me if there's anything there that is not completely clear. Okay. Yeah? No threat of eliminative. I'm not sure I can say it. No threat of eliminativism. Right? Well, what does that mean? Well, the idea is something like this: that when you're looking for the mind, you're looking for the causes of behavior. But the causes of behavior are all physical. So if you want a systematic theory about the causes of behavior, the best place to look is not in folk psychology, in imaginative understanding. The best place to look is in theories of brain function. That's the argument, for eliminating talk about the mind. But we've got this general biology that applies to all living things. And humans are just a special case of it. Once we have that, why would you talk about the mind at all? Let's not talk about the mind. Let's throw it in the dustbin of history. Just as we don't anymore, usually, think of the weather in terms of the actions of the gods, because we've just got a better way of doing it now. You talk about air pressure and stuff like that. Well, with humans, we've got a better way of doing it now. Just as with the weather, you can do it directly in terms of air pressure. With the humans, you can do it directly in terms of biology. You can keep this picturesque talk of people having minds, just as you can keep picturesque talk of the weather being the gods being angry. But that's all it is, just picturesque talk. That's eliminativism. Yeah? But then once you have this picture, I'm not saying anything more about having a mind than saying using the talk about a mind to predict someone's behavior is successful. You can really do it. You can really predict someone's behavior by this technique. That's all it is to have a mind. Yeah. Then, since you're claiming so little when you say someone has a mind, then you can't be shown to be wrong by appealing to biology. Yep. Very good. Yes, absolutely. I think this is a real issue. Yeah, this is the kind of Blade Runner problem. Blade Runner? I never know. Is that? Have you guys heard of Blade Runner? Yeah, okay. Some of you have. Okay. Well, yeah, if you get robots that you can apply the intentional strategy to, yeah, you can reliably and voluminously predict their behavior by assuming they've got beliefs and desires, then Dennett's going to say they have a mind just as much as you do. There's no sense in which you have a mind and they don't. That is actually going to be social robots are, there are all these ingenious people at MIT and in Berkeley who are making robots that tap into your imaginative understanding, that call on your capacity for empathy to interact with them. And that's just going to keep happening. And we're really going to have to face these problems. Is this real when I'm just tapping into it? Dennett says, if you could predict it using imaginative understanding, then that's as real a mind there as anything that any of your friends have. And if you're going to say no, you really better know why, because this is coming very quickly, it seems to me. Yeah. Okay. I actually agree with Umbra that this Dennett's picture just can't be right. That when we're talking about psychology, when we're talking about the mind, we want to be talking about the causes of behavior. When Jaspers was talking about sinking yourself into the psychic situation of another and understanding genetically by empathy how one event emerges from another, that is thinking about what's making the thing happen. In a court of law, we don't just say, well, it was reliably and voluminously predictable via the intentional strategy that Jones was going to kill Brown. When we ask, for which motive did he act? Did he do it out of revenge? Did he do it out of self-defense? Did he do it for both reasons? These are causal questions. You can't make sense of what's going on in our ordinary talk about the mind unless you think of these psychological states being causes. Or to follow up on that robot, suppose you've got a robot, but it's not like an autonomous robot. It's actually being controlled by puppeteers from Alpha Centauri. They are saying of the robot, ha ha ha, now we make it go to a philosophy lecture. Now we make it go to the free speech cafe. Now we make it go to the library. Right? And let's suppose that's your friend. Right? That's what's happening. They're just being steered about by puppeteers and Alpha Centauri. Then if you've got a puppet that is being driven about like that, its behavior is going to be predictable in the way that Dennett says. You can try and imaginatively understand it and say, what's it going to do now? And that'll work fine. But does it have a mind? Does that kind of look at it. It is but a puppet. It is a mere puppet. How could it have a mind? But you can still predict what it's going to do in the way Dennett suggests. In order, if you remember this old friend, if you think about this guy, that whole system, you can predict what Chinese sentences is going to spit back out in answer to your questions. Is any of it minded in the sense of understanding the Chinese? No. But Dennett's picture says, yeah, that's right, that's got a mind, that's thinking, that's using the Chinese as the language in which it thinks. Because you can reliably and voluminously predict its behavior assuming that that's what's going on. But that's obviously a mistake. There's nothing here that understands Chinese. Or if you had Bloch's homunculus-headed robot. Bloch's homunculus-headed robot is reliably and voluminously predictable via the intentional strategy. Does it have a mind? No. It does not have a mind. Of course it doesn't have it. It's not conscious. Can't think at all. How could it? So Dennett's picture must be wrong, it seems to me. But the trouble is, if you say it's wrong for the reasons I just gave, that it's not the mental life that is what's causing these things to act, then the question is, in the case of you and me, there's all this biology that is driving us around. So when we say, well, in addition to all this biology, you furthermore have a mind, and that's telling you something about the causes of behavior that you didn't know just by knowing the biology, then they can't both be right. And surely biology is authoritative. Surely we can't appeal to folk psychology to rule out biology. So you face that threat of eliminativism once you say, no, if I have a mind, it must be making things happen. And on that bombshell, we'll pack up for today and we'll do the exam study questions on Wednesday. Okay, thanks guys.